Hi, my name's Daniel Robinson and I'm a developer for IBM App Connect Enterprise. In today's video, I'm going to show how from ACE version 13.0.2, you can now use Avro-based schemas with the Kafka nodes in order to have data serialization and deserialization. I'm going to be using an Event Streams instance for the topic and schema registry, and I'll create a couple of flows for producing to and consuming from the topic. I will also show how to install and configure the Event Streams instance, but I have assumed that the OpenShift cluster is already available and the entitlement key for Event Streams has been activated. Before diving into the demonstration, I'll just say a few words about Avro. So Avro is an open source data serialization format known for its efficiency in storage and speed, particularly in big data environments. It offers advantages in terms of schema evolution, compact binary format, and high performance for write-intensive operations, making it suitable for use cases like data streaming with Apache Kafka. For App Connect Enterprise 13.0.2, the Kafka producer node has been enhanced so that JSON messages passed into the node can be serialized into Avro format using a referenced Avro schema before it is published to the topic. The Kafka consumer and Kafka read nodes have similar properties, but for consuming messages from a topic and deserializing back into JSON. I will start with the installation and configuration of Event Streams. If this part of the video isn't of interest to you, feel free to skip forward to the bit where we configure the ACE flows to talk to the Event Streams instance. As you can see here, this is the login for the Red Hat OpenShift cluster that I have access to. And upon logging in, I'm presented with this dashboard. If I go to the left-hand pane and click the operators twisty and then select installed operators, I should be able to find Event Streams in this list. We have one down here. So this takes me to the installed operators page. We've got lots of tabs along the top. If I click on the Event Streams tab, you'll see that I have none available. I don't have any installed. I will click the button to create Event Streams. And then for the purposes of this, I will use these samples. And we're going to be using Scram-based authentication. So I will choose this development Scram and I'll click Try It. And you might have noticed the YAML has been updated on the side here. I'm going to leave the name as it is, but feel free to change it. You just need to remember what you call it. What you do need to do is accept the license. So I will change that to true. And I'm going to take all the other defaults. Note here the authentication is Scram SHA-512. We will be using that to configure the policies when we're back in App Connect Enterprise. And I think that's all you'll need to get from here. So we'll click Create. So it's started to install the event streams that I've requested. If I click here, it's not ready yet. We'll give it a few moments, and once it's ready, we'll have an admin UI link available that we can use to access the Event Streams instance. While we're waiting for that to install, what we should be able to do is if I go back to the main Event Streams page and select Kafka user, we're going to need a user to log into the UI with. So for now, we'll create an admin one, just because it's simple and will give us all the accesses we need. So I'll click Try It again from the samples over on the right. It's going to create me a credential called admin. I'm going to leave it in the default namespace that we have here. I need to change the cluster name to the name that we gave last time. I left it as default, so it's just dev scram. And I'm just going to click Create. In order to get the password for the admin user, we go to the left-hand pane and select the workloads twisty and then go to the secrets. You might need to search because it's called admin. Mine's right at the top, so I can click on that. And then if I go to the bottom of the page, there are a couple of pieces of data we need to grab. So we have a password and a SASL Jazz config. The SASL Jazz config down the bottom will be used partly in the policy. If we just copy this because the password's actually the same, and we'll make a note. And now we can go back to the Event Streams. So now that the Event Streams instance has been fully stood up, all the pods are running, I now have an admin UI link. So I'm going to click on that and you'll now be presented with a login screen. So admin was the user, and the password that we retrieved in the last step goes there. And all things being well, you'll be presented with the dashboard. So we've got a bunch of tiles along here. Note we also have a left-hand pane to help us navigate around between this home page, topics, consumer groups, schema registry, monitoring, and toolbox. So I'm going to click on the topics tab. You can see I actually have some topics already pre-created here. Don't worry about those. We're going to create a new one for this video. But before we do that, we're going to grab some more details so that we can actually connect to the cluster. So top right of the screen, big blue button, connect to this cluster. And this side pane should open out. We've got a few things here. We need to grab this external Kafka listener link. This is the Bootstrap server address. I'm going to take a copy of that. It'll end in 443. Why am I mentioning that? Because if you scroll down, we've also got a schema registry endpoint, which looks quite similar. But this one doesn't have a port number and the path is actually a little bit different. So as well as the links, we need to generate some new Scrum credentials because I'm not going to use the admin user in our ACE flows. I'm actually going to create a user here. So we click that button. I will call this Kafka Cred1. Again, you can call it what you want. You just need to make sure you remember the name. And then you can make various choices around what access and permissions your credentials has. I'm just going to take the defaults because it keeps things simple. So all topics, all groups. We're not going to worry about transactional IDs. And having clicked through, I now have some fresh credentials. So again, take a note of these. And you want the username. You want the password. And you also want the basic auth token. We'll come back to what we need that token for when we've uploaded our schema. But for now, just record it. We will be using it. So we grabbed the Bootstrap server address, we grabbed the schema registry address, we've generated new Scrum credentials and captured the password and the token. The last thing while we're here is we're going to download the PKCS12 certificate. And when we click this blue button, it's already downloaded and you'll see that a password has now been shown. You need to copy that, make a note, because again, we'll need this when we configure the ACE flows. So while we're here, let's create the topic by clicking on this blue button. So the first thing to do is give the topic a name. I'm going to go with new leads. And then I'm going to take the defaults for everything else. So I now have a new topic, new leads. And if we click in here, as you'd expect, nothing to display. We haven't published any messages to this topic yet. Before we go and start configuring App Connect Enterprise and creating flows, we're just going to do the schema upload. So we're getting all the event streams bits done in one go. So along the left pane here, you see I just clicked fourth one down and it takes us to the schema registry. Similar to creating a new topic, we're going to click on this add schema button in the top right. And I'm going to click on this upload definition and then go to the place on my file system where I have some schemas already defined. So I have two schemas here. So we're going to start using the leads.avsc. So this is a Avro based schema. You can see it looks like JSON, but has a namespace, has this type name field structure. For more information, there's lots of documentation on Avro's website. But you can see here, we're going to upload a schema which is going to expect a name with a value of type string, an age, which will take a value which is an int, and a contact, presumably something like an email address, which is going to be in a string format. Let's upload that schema. So we can see the schema is valid. And if I click preview, you can see what I've just shown you there. So I'll add the schema and you need to click add schema in the top right afterwards. Otherwise it's not actually going to upload. And you'll be taken back to the schema registry front page. And here is our recently uploaded schema. So that should be all the pieces we needed to do on the event stream side. So now I'll start a toolkit. So now we have the toolkit loaded up. The first thing I'm going to do is create the application. So let's just call it Kafka Avro. Create a new message flow. We need a Kafka producer, and this will be HTTP in. We'll also have a reply node on the end. We will grab a compute node, and of course we need the Kafka. We'll wire the out terminals to the in terminals, and we'll configure the nodes. So for the HTTP input, we need to give it a URL, do Kafka send. For the compute node, we should change the mode from message to local environment and message. And if we double click on the node, we get taken to the SQL, and we should uncomment those. For now, we'll come back and add some more code here later. That's enough for now though. Back to the producer tab. For the Kafka producer, we need to give it the topic name. The Bootstrap server is actually going to be provided via a policy. We'll stick that in there. And if we go to the policy tab and click browse, we don't have any policies yet, so I'll select create a policy. We need a new project because we don't have one. Let's call it my policies, and this policy will be a Kafka policy. Click finish, and we get taken to the policy editor. So we can see we've got the name and the type filled in for us. So we just need to fill in the details that we recorded earlier when setting up the event streams. We need the Bootstrap server address, the one ending in 443. We need to select SASL SSL. I did that using the down arrow in that box, or you can click the arrow to expand the list on the side. The SASL mechanism will be scram SHA 512, and we saw this in the YAML back in OpenShift when we were setting all that up. The security identity we haven't created yet, but we'll call it Kafka cred. The SASL config, now this is the string that we recorded when creating the admin user. So this is the scram login module required string. Note the semicolon at the end. We also need to set up the trust store stuff. So I have previously copied the ESCert from my downloads into this directory here. So I will. We also need to change this to PKCS12. And finally, we need a name. Let's call it Kafka Trust. Save that. And that should be the Kafka policy sorted out. So if we go back to our producer flow, we've got the policy in place. We've done the basic tab stuff. There's nothing to do on the HTTP reply node. I did forget on the HTTP input, we should also, just to make things a bit cleaner, set the input message passing to JSON. Save the flow. So that should be the producer done. Let's create the consumer quickly. For the consumer, I'm going to just wire up a file output node so we can see what the deserialization looks like after the Kafka consumer reads from the topic. In particular, this is for the Avro part of the demonstration. Again, we'll take the out and we'll wire it to the in. Kafka consumer needs the topic name. The Bootstrap server is going to be supplied by the policy. We do need a consumer group. For the purpose of this, it doesn't matter. We'll just give it group 1 because it needs something. And this time, instead of going to the policy tab on the Kafka consumer properties, I'm just going to right click the node. I actually have an option here to select policy and hit OK. And then if you go to the policy tab, you'll see that it's filled that in for you. And then finally, file output, I'm going to select the button to write directly to the output file. I'm going to use the same directory that I've been using as like working area for this demo. Same place I've put my ESCert. We'll call this Kafka consumer out. We'll save that. And that should be all the configuration we need for the application and the two flows. So we've got the flows, we've got the Kafka policy. What we do need is an integration server that's connected to a Vault with some credentials available for the flows to use. So I'm going to hop over to my terminal. I need to make sure that I've sourced my MQSI profile. So now I'm going to use the IBM Mint command to create a vault. If you're not sure how the command works, you can look at the help. So I'm just going to create my external vault in this current directory that I'm in. Give it the password. And now you can see we have my external vault here. Next, we'll add some credentials to the vault. So IB Mint, set credential, credential type Kafka. So now we set the auth type to basic. We need to give it a name that matches the name we gave it in the policy. So this was Kafka Cred. We need to supply the username and password that we want this security identity to use. We need to give it an external directory vault. And we need to give it an external directory vault key, which is the password we just created a minute ago. And then we need to give it a workdir, which will be the Kafka demo workdir. Apologies, I don't need the work directory, do I? We need to do something similar, but this time it needs to be the trust store. Doesn't take an auth type. We called it Kafka Trust on the policy. We don't need a username. The password will match the password that we got when we downloaded the certificate. We need to edit the server conf YAML of our newly created integration server. So within the work directory, so open the file, search for external, and under the credentials section, and here we can put the path to the external directory vault. So now if we run the integration server command again, we are now using the external directory vault because I've just enabled it in the server conf YAML. So if we go back to the toolkit, and down in the corner here in the Integration Explorer view, if we right click on the integration server and connect localhost 7600, click finish. So now I can see my server down here and I have my credentials. I need to make sure my policies are deployed, so I'll right click the policies, select deploy, click finish on my integration server. And now if I go to my producer flow and put the flow into record mode, this is going to ask me about deploying the flow. I'm going to say OK. Now you can see we're in record mode. You've got this blue bar runs around the edge of the screen, it says it's in recording. So if we now go up the top here, we can send a message to the flow. So I'm going to create a new message. I'm going to grab a pre-recorded message. Bit of JSON, we've got a name, we've got an age, and we've got a contact. Assume this is for vehicle sales maybe. So someone's come in, expressed interest, and some details have been captured so that they can be followed up with later. So if I click send, you can see the message going through, and you can see exactly the same being returned by the HTTP reply node. If we go to our Event Streams instance, go to our topics, new leads, we can see we do indeed have a message, and it's the same details that we were expecting to see there. Raw format versus formatted. Now let's suppose we send another message in, but this time someone has accidentally put the age in as a string, for example. So we're going to send that, goes through, and if we refresh the topic over here, Sure enough, there's our second message with our agent as a string, which is not what we want. So that's the basic Kafka flow talking to an Event Streams instance. And you can see that we have no validation on the schemas, and we get the full payload there, the names as well as the values. If we go back to the toolkit, stop the flow exerciser. Now let's additionally configure the flow to use Avro. So click on the Kafka producer node, and then down in the properties there is an Avro tab. So here we have a default serialization mode. We're going to click this and select Avro. We then need to give it a schema. So let's do that now. We'll click the browse. There are none available, so we'll create a new policy. We can use the existing policy project, and let's call this Avro. So we click finish, and then we're taken to the policy editor for a schema registry type policy. First of all, let's change the registry type to Confluent API. The two values available at the moment are file or Confluent API. We'll come back to the file at the end of the demo, but we'll go to Confluent for now. And then the schema registry URL was the one we recorded from earlier when we were looking at connecting to the Event Streams cluster. This is a URL which has devscram, IBM, ESAC, reg external at the front of it compared to the Bootstrap server. Schema registry cache time to live, we can leave it as is, but you might want to reduce that number down. That's in seconds, by the way. So we need a security identity here. Now, we can use the same Kafka cred 1 that we created in Event Streams earlier because I gave it all the various permissions, but we do still need to create a separate security identity for ACE to consume, even though underlying that security ID, it's the same connection details. So we'll call this schema cred instead of Kafka cred. And then we need to put the same trust store information that we had from the other policy. So if I come over here, I can copy that value, change this to PKCS12, and we'll call this Kafka trust, same as we did before. So we can use the same trust store credential, but we need a different schema registry security identity. So that's the new policy. Let's save that. And then if we go back to our producer flow, we should now see that the schema registry policy has been filled in there for us. But we need to add an value for schema ID. We need to run a curl command. So I'm actually going to just open up the terminal within the toolkit. So we're going to use a curl command to retrieve the schema ID for the schema that we wish to use for the data serialization. So we've got a curl command. We've got the basic token. This was the one that we retrieved when we created the Kafka cred 1 scram credentials. We then have the schema registry endpoint. And then we have a URL of /artifacts / schema name. In this case, it's leads /version /1 /meta. So if we hit enter on that, this command I found this in the docs for Event Streams. And you can see here we returned some data about the version, the name, creation date times. And we've got this value here called global ID. And I have a global ID of 1. And so that is what I will use for the schema ID. Save that, go to the consumer flow, right click the Kafka consumer, select policy schema registry policy. If you're happy with the selection, hit OK. Then you'll note here down on the Avro policy, our policy has been filled in, the value. We still need to change the serialization mode to Avro. And note we don't need to supply a schema ID here because it will be part of the payload when the consumer node reads from the topic. Save that. Go back to the producer flow and put it in record mode again. So before I can use the Avro schema successfully, I've created the policy, I've given the policy a new schema cred security identity, but I haven't created that and added it to the vault. So let's do that now. The credential type is schema registry, basic auth again. And this time the schema is called schema cred. The username and password are the same, and so are the other flags to do with the external directory vault. So we hit enter on that, and we should now have the free credentials that we need. If we go back to the toolkit, we should now have all the credentials, and we can see down in the bottom left here, we have a Kafka cred, a schema cred, and a Kafka trust. My integration server is running again. And let's stick it back in record mode. And finally, we should be able to see the schemas now being used. And I'm going to fire in this bad message to begin with, and bad in as much as the age is a string and our schema says that should be an int. So I click send. Oh, error. So if we expand this box to read it a little bit more, and we can see here near the bottom, the explanation for why an error has occurred is it expected an int, but it got value string. So if we close that and we go back to injecting another message, let's go back to message here. I've updated this so it's not Luffy again, just so we can see it coming through separate. Note the age is back to being an int. We click send and it's gone through successfully. Close that. If we go back over to Event Streams, we go find our topic. You can now see that we have this new one here. This was the old age with a string. Note the date, the timestamps quite a bit older. That was the previous attempt. And here you can see the latest message with the Avro turned on. And you can see the formatted payload looks very different here compared to the previous one. And if you go to the raw payload, even more so. So note we only have the values for the name, the age, and the contact. The age is actually this double star in the middle there. A much more condensed payload. And then, if we just open up another window here, you can see we've got a Kafka consumer out. And this has been capturing all of the payloads as they come from the consumer node. So we've got the first one, the second one, and then the third one. And note that if I move that there, let's just run that again. See here, we've got the Sanji, the 21, and the Blackfoot Battier contact, and it's all been expanded to have the names that are associated with the values, so name, age, and contact. So it's been deserialized when it's come through the consumer, and then the file output, you can see we've got all the same stuff that was originally fired in. But when it's on Event Streams, we've had this much more compact format. So the only thing left to show you is the file option on the schema. So let's just stop the flow. I'll go to my Avro schema. We'll change the type to be file, and we need to update the registry URL. I happened to have my schemas in a similar place on my file system. So if we look here, if we go into the schemas directory, we see we've got two schemas in here. If I look at alt leads, you can see this time we've got a different structure that's expected. So let's imagine some feedbacks come back saying, actually, we want to grab the phone number instead of email address for contact. And we don't need to know about the age of these people, but we would like to know what color they might be interested in for their vehicle. Just seen a typo there. Let's get that straight. So yeah, so you can see we've got the color, expecting a string, and also people are interested if they're actually an existing customer, are they returning or not. So we've got a Boolean flag at the end there. But let's just say you're doing some development, you don't want to have to interact with an Event Streams instance for whatever reason. So you've got this file and you want to be able to check against this file schema as opposed to one loaded up in the schema registry on Event Streams. So we've got the path there. which matches what I've added to the policy. Note you need to have the trailing slash. So as well as needing these trailing slash at the end, you also need to make sure you have file : / prepended to the string. So it knows it's a file it's looking for, not an actual website or URL. So we've set the type to file. We've given the path to the folder that our schemas are held in. The other thing we need to do is update the Kafka producer to use the new schema. So currently we have schema ID equals 1, which is the value we retrieved from the schema registry earlier. We could update it directly here to match the name of the schema file that we want to use. I'm actually going to do it in the compute node so we can demonstrate the local environment override. So something like this. So we've got set the output local environment destination Kafka output schema ID, and we set it to be equal to the name of the file as it is referred to internally. So let me show you. It's this name here. So it's not the name of the file itself, but the name that you have given it inside the file. So we save that. So we need to really make sure that my updated policy has been deployed. So here you can see the Avro has been changed successfully. So now I'll go back to my flow exerciser. I'll redeploy my flow just to make sure we pick up all the changes, such as the new SQL. Here's a new lead which matches the old schema format. So it would have previously been successful. It now fails. So we scroll down and we can see we're getting different values than what we would expect to get. So let's close that. Let's try another message. So here's one where we've got the contact as a number, we've got the color, and we've got whether or not they're an existing customer. So let's try this version. So now it's complaining it didn't find a field it was accepting, the existing field. Strange, I thought that was there. Existing customer. So let's go and correct that. If we send that through, hey, now we have success. And if we hop on over to Event Streams, hit the refresh, and oh look, there we go, a serialized data payload. Much smaller than this whole name, age, contact, name value pairs. The final thing, if we jump back to the command line, if we go back up and look at our Kafka consumer, we can see last entry there, name law, contact 147893256, color yellow, and existing true. And if I was to send another message through, let's replace this with, let's just try one more contact. We already saw the existing customer complain because it didn't match, so existing is what we need. Let's put that to false. And let's say that the person didn't grab the color. We send that through. We get an error. Unrecognized token, this time false. It was expecting a JSON string number array object or null, or true or false. So we go back. Let's correct that. Send it again. Now it complains. Didn't find the color. So let's just stick that in. And note, you can actually change the order around. As long as it can actually match, it shouldn't care. So you can see we sent in name, contact, existing color. We got it all back. If we look in the files, you can see that last one there. Note the ordering matches the schema's order, not the order I actually sent the information in. And if we go to the event streams, we'll see the latest message received just now. And we've got a nice serialized data in this very compact format. And that was it. So in summary, we've seen how we can set up an Event Streams instance that we can then use App Connect Enterprise flows to interact with. We have configured the Kafka producer and a Kafka consumer to talk to the Event Streams instance, both with Avro turned off as the previous default behavior always was, but we've also enabled that new behavior. We've seen how schema validation will stop payloads which don't look how they should from actually being produced to the topic. We've seen how we can use a file-based schema instead of a schema registry such as the one that comes with Event Streams. So I hope some of that would be proved to be useful, and you will be able to play around with Avro-based schemas to make your message flows more efficient in terms of their speed and how much storage they're using on their Kafka topics or Event Streams. Thank you for watching.